You've described this as an intelligence failure, but a failure is something that happens accidentally.
None of the intelligence that was coming up talking about the storming of the Capitol, killing members of Congress, or killing my police officers was ever discussed at the conference calls that I was on, at least.
That doesn't seem to make sense at all.
It doesn't make sense. I'm looking at my men and women having their asses handed to them, and my first thought was, fuck it, I will take whatever discipline there is.
Once things got out of control, for 71 minutes, Pelosi refused to allow you to bring in the National Guard. Why don't we have answers?
It doesn't seem like people really want to get to the bottom of it, and it gets worse from there. I had a conference call with the leaders of all the law enforcement. It was a call I coordinated. Not one person on that call talked about any concerns for the intelligence, the attack on the Capitol that we were seeing that was out there. That's what's scary.
This sounds like a setup to me. I'm sorry, it does.
New Jersey State Police beat DC National Guard to the Capitol.
Wait, cops drove from New Jersey before the National Guard could get from the Armory on Capitol Hill to the Capitol. Why isn't this story everywhere?
I have no idea.
If you wanted to understand what happened on January 6, 2021 at the U.S. Capitol, one of the first people you'd talk to, maybe the first, would be Stephen Sund. Sund was the chief of Capitol Police that day. He knew more about what happened than virtually anyone else in the United States. And yet congressional investigators weren't interested in talking to him. The media, not interested in talking to him. But we were. So earlier this year, we did a long sit-down interview with Stephen Sund about January 6th. That interview was set to air on April 24th of this year, and it never did. We don't own that tape, so we can't show it to you. So instead, we invited Stephen Sund back to explain what he saw and experienced that day. What he has to say is shocking. We recommend you watch. Mr. Sund, thank you very much for coming back.
Thank you for having me back.
So I want to start with the days before January 6th, 2021. It was commonly known there was going to be a demonstration, or believed there was going to be a demonstration in front of the Capitol that day. You were the chief of Capitol Police. You're in charge of security at the Capitol. So it would seem logical that you would have the most intelligence, the most up-to-date, most accurate intelligence about what was likely to happen that day, because you're consulting with all kinds of other agencies, intel agencies, law enforcement agencies, lots of federal agencies. But it doesn't sound like you did have the most information about what was going to happen.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, what we've learned that it was out there at the time versus what we had coming into it, night and day. And when you talk about the intelligence agency, I have my own intelligence agency up at Capitol Police, IICD, Interagency Intelligence Coordination Division.
Yes.
That coordinates with the other intelligence agencies. And now, we're seeing the intelligence I was getting coming into it was indicating this was going to be just like the previous MAGA rallies, the November and December rallies that we had, where we had limited skirmishes. We had some skirmishes afterwards down by BLM Plaza with some of the Antifa groups and some of the BLM groups. But coming into it, absolutely zero with the intelligence that we know now existed, talking about attacking the Capitol, killing my police officers, attacking members of Congress and killing members of Congress. None of that was included in the intelligence coming up to.
That you received.
Correct.
But others received that intelligence.
Well, we now know FBI, DHS was swimming in that intelligence. We also know now that the military seemed to have some very concerning intelligence as well.
It's hard to overstate how strange that is, because you were in charge of the actual facility that was the focus of the protest.
Well, think about it. I'm the chief of police at the United States Capitol, probably one of the most prominent and should be the most secure building in the United States, in the world. You'd like to think of that. But when you look at it, and don't take my word for it, look at, there's now at least four congressional reports talking about the intelligence failure, IG reports, GAO reports talking about various intelligence failures. But coming into it, think about it. FBI, the Washington Field Office didn't put out a single document, a single official document specific to January 6th. DHS didn't put out a single official document specific to January 6th. That's very unusual. I've been through many other events in Washington, D.C. FBI would host a joint conference call at the least, maybe a executive JTTF, Joint Terrorism Task Force briefing, and for all these big events, DHS and FBI would get together and put out something that was called a JIB, a Joint Intelligence Bulletin. Zero for January 6th.
So you've described this as an intelligence failure, but a failure is something that happens accidentally. And I don't see how this could be accidental. So walk us through the contact that you had with DHS and FBI in the days before January 6th.
So my contacts with those agencies or the other law enforcement agencies would have always been through my IICD.
Yes.
They were the ones that was the conduit. We're a consumer of intelligence. We had turned to the intelligence community to get the latest intelligence. I know Metropolitan was hosting a conference call every couple of Mondays, and I was on a couple of those conference calls. None of the intelligence that was coming up talking about the storming of the Capitol, killing members of Congress, or killing my police officers was ever discussed in those the conference calls that I was on, at least. And think of this.
And so you never heard that?
Never heard it. And
But how could you not have? I don't work in a federal bureaucracy, but that doesn't seem to make sense at all.
it doesn't make sense. Think about this. On January 5th, the day before the attack, at 1 p.m., I think it's 1 or noon, I had a conference call with the leaders of all the law enforcement, Conti from Metropolitan Police Department, Steve D'Antuono, the director of the Washington Field Office for the FBI. Nobody from DHS was on. I hadn't thought about that, but all the law enforcement that was down there. I had the Military District of Washington, General Omar Jones, on the phone with me. I had the head of the National Guard, General William Walker, on the call. It was a call I coordinated. Not one person on that call talked about any concerns for the intelligence, the attack on the Capitol, the threats to officers that we were seeing that was out there. That's what's scary.
But to be clear, do we now know for a fact that the people on that call knew about those threats and didn't mention them to you?
So this is what we know for a fact, and I'll tell you, I'm not the only chief that was in the dark. You look at Robert Conti, head of the largest police department in Washington, D.C. He also said the same thing. He wasn't getting the same notifications like the Norfolk memo that came out the day before. He didn't get it. So Steve D'Antuono, who's the Washington Field Office FBI director, you look at the GAO report that came out February of this year. It talks about multiple emails. It's a GAO report, or it's a Senate report that just came out in July, just last month. Talks about multiple emails going to Steve D'Antuono on Sunday, Monday, and some probably Tuesday, just the days before, talking about the violence that they're predicting coming up to the Capitol. And I have a video call with him on that Tuesday, and nothing said about it. I mean,
he didn't mention it.
Not a word, not a word.
So, not to repeat myself, but that just does not make sense.
It doesn't. It doesn't, especially when you think about this, the military, the United States military. And this gets really convoluted once you get into the response on January 6th and how I was delayed getting resources. You have the United States military, Secretary of Defense, or Acting Secretary of Defense Miller, and General Milley had both discussed locking down the city of Washington, D.C. because they were so worried about violence at the Capitol on January 6th. On Sunday and Monday, they had been discussing locking down the city, revoking permits on Capitol Hill because of the concern for violence. You know who issues the permits on Capitol Hills for demonstrations? I do. You know who wasn't told? Me. Instead, on January 4th, what does Miller do? He puts out a memo restricting the National Guard from carrying the various weapons, any civil disobedience equipment that would be utilized for the very demonstrations or violence that he sees coming. It just doesn't make any sense.
Wait. So the military says we're so concerned about potential imminent violence that we are considering shutting down the city. But at the very same time, they decide that the National Guard can't adopt an aggressive posture to protect the city.
They're deploying because they're going to be deploying National Guard to assist Washington, D.C. with crowd control at metros and some of the traffic control areas. But they put this out on January 4th, specific to January 5th and 6th. And this direction affected the National Guard in Virginia and Maryland. When I was calling, begging for assistance on January 6th, they weren't allowed to respond at first. You look at Governor Hogan. He did a press conference saying he was begging to respond, and he was being denied by the Pentagon, all because of the memo.
So why?
You know, you begin to wonder why, and especially when you look at things like something that I recently came across when you talk about the military. General Milley, you know, we're now finding out, and it's not from me. This is from Carol Lenig, you know, investigative reporter with the Washington Post, has found that he was using data miner on his own, coming across intelligence.
Tell us what data miner is.
So data miner is an intelligence platform. It's not something your average citizen would have on their computer. I guess it goes in and does crawling across webs. I'm not really sure how it works.
Yes.
But it's not it's an intelligence platform. He's picking up intelligence talking about killing members of Congress and attacking the United States Capitol. And he's not telling me. He's telling select members of Congress. I mean, Carol Lenig writes about it in her book. That's concerning as hell, because as the chief of police, you know, there's a duty to warn there, and I should be told so I can take the necessary action. I don't know who else he was telling, but he sure wasn't telling me.
again, what could possibly be the explanation for that?
I'm not really sure.
But you've done this for over 30 years. You're very familiar. You've been in law enforcement in D.C. specifically for over 30 years. So you know how the city runs. You know how the federal agencies respond to protests. This is not the first violent protest.
Not at all.
There have been many.
I've done many national special security events, and this was handled differently. No, the intelligence, no jib, no coordination, no discussion in advance. It's almost like they wanted it to be watered down, the intelligence to be watered down for some reason. I talked about a little bit in the book that maybe they were concerned for the Trump invoking the Insurrection Act, and they're worried about that. But I've had people, there's other, thoughts out there. But luckily we still have people investigating this because I still think there's puzzle pieces missing. Someone's going to find out what's really behind all this because it wasn't right the way the intelligence was handled and the way out we're set up on the Hill.
Big picture, just to restate, you've seen many things like this, and as you just said, this was very different. This was handled very differently. By whom?
By the intelligence. I'd say one, by the intelligence agency, two, by the military. So the reason why I say the military, think of this. By federal law, Congress passed a law that requires me to go to the Sergeant Arms Capitol Police Board in advance of an event and to request federal resources such as the National Guard. So Congress passed a law. It's 2 U.S. Code 1970. Look it up. Just make sure you look it up before December 22 when they changed it. So what was in effect on the 6th, that requires me to go and get approval for bringing in National Guard or federal assistance in advance. I have to go to the Capitol Police Board and get approval from congressional leadership in advance, like I did on January 3rd. I'm denied twice because of optics and because the intelligence didn't support it. So think about that.
Let me ask you the question, who made that decision? Who denied you?
I was denied by Paul Irving, House Sergeant Arms, and also Mike Stenger, Senate Sergeant Arms.
And who do they
on
work,
January 3rd.
Who do they work for?
It would have been working for Pelosi on the House side. That Pelosi was the number one boss, and then McConnell on the Senate side.
Ah.
So
effectively, Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi shut down your request.
My request was shut down, one, because of optics, which is interesting. You're going to hear that term come up a couple more times. Optics, or the look of the National Guard on the Hill. But yeah, in the Capitol Police Board, I mean, it's unbelievable that I'm the only chief of police in the United States that has a law preventing me, not just regulations, rules that say I got to go and get approval to bring in the National Guard, a law. So that's crazy that Congress is going to pass a law that controls what I can do to protect the Capitol, and even in emergency. So think of this. Even while we're under attack, I have to go to those same two people to request the National Guard to be brought in. I have 340 National Guard that have been activated. At least 150 to 180 of those are in the city, many of them within eyesight of the Capitol, okay? We get to come under attack at 12:53. 12:55, I called the Washington, D.C. Police Department. I talked to their Assistant Chief, Jeff Carroll. Thank God I had talked to him at 10:59 in the morning and asked him if he could possibly put some additional resource on Constitution Avenue. And he had some CDU platoons up there. Called him, said, hey, please send those in right away, because we knew as soon as they came up to their west front, they started attacking, it was going to be bad. 12:58, I make my first call to the Sergeant Arms, asking, saying, hey, it's bad, we need assistance, I need a declaration of emergency, I need to bring in the military immediately and federal resources. I'm told by Paul Irving, quote, I'm going to run it up the chain, I'll get back to you.
The chain is Pelosi.
The chain his chain would be up to Nancy Pelosi. He didn't have to do that, but he wouldn't give me authorization. The law says in emergency he can grant me authorization, but he didn't. He said he'd run up the chain. My next call was over to Mike Stenger. He's now the chairman of the Capitol Police Board. Told him the same thing. We're getting our asses handed to us on the wet front. I need federal resources. He said, what did Paul tell you? I said, he's run up the chain. He goes, let's wait to hear what we hear from Paul. Sorry. So for the next 71 minutes, I make 32 calls. I'm in the command center. I'm calling my partner agencies. And by law, one of the first people to offer assistance was the United States Secret Service. And by law, I shouldn't have requested their assistance. I shouldn't be until I had approval. But I'm looking at my men and women having their asses handed to them. And my first thought was, fuck it, I will take whatever discipline there is. Send me whatever you got. And that's the one text Secret Service turned over. You know how they lost all their texts?
Yes.
It's the text between their Chief Sullivan and myself. Thank God for him.
But I don't. You make this call immediately to the House Sergeant Arms, who reports Mr. Irving, who reports to Nancy Pelosi. He
Correct.
says, "I'll call Pelosi."
He says, "I'm running up the chain."
Running up the chain, but that is the chain.
I hear you. I got you. I want to tell you exactly what he said.
What happens then? Does he get back to you?
So for the next 71 minutes, I make the 32 calls to a number of agencies. 11 of those calls are follow-up calls. And look in the Senate combined report from 2001. They have a great infographic of the call after call after call after call. 11 times I call in the next 71 minutes going, where are we on the approval? Where are we on the approval? He goes, any minute now. Any minute. I'm going to get any minute. Finally at 2:09, 71 minutes later, 2:09, I'm finally given approval. Think about that. 71 minutes later. I immediately call Mike Stinger, say we've got approval. I was so pissed off, I made sure that the watch commander, I'm in the command center, I yelled to John Wisham, the lieutenant, that's my watch commander. I said, John, mark the time as 2:10. I finally got approval for the National Guard. I was that mad.
So what is I just want to pause on this for a minute. That's like, it's almost unbelievable. So this is an event that Pelosi herself has likened to Pearl Harbor and 9/11, the worst thing that's ever happened on American soil. And she's in charge of allowing the National Guard to come in and respond, but she doesn't for 71 minutes. What is that?
I can't fathom why. I mean, they had to have known what was going on. I was telling them how bad it was.
Well, it was on TV.
It was on TV. It was right outside of Mike Stinger's office. And they had a meeting in his office saying, hey, where's the National Guard? And they're like, oh, we're trying to make... The fighting's going on right outside his office. And I'm still getting delayed.
This is an unbelievable story.
Oh, it is. Now get a kick out of this.
Has anyone ever explained this?
It's verbatim in my book. I have details. The whole chapter on January 6th is almost 100 pages long.
But I don't understand. So we're only 10 minutes into this, and you've told me two things. One, the other federal agencies withheld critical information from you in charge of security at the Capitol before January 6th. And once it started and things got out of control, for 71 minutes, Pelosi refused to allow you to bring in the National Guard. So those are two of the biggest questions from January 6th. And my question is, why don't we have answers to why that happened?
It doesn't seem like people really want to get to the bottom of it. It really doesn't. And it just gets worse. It gets worse from there.
I'm sorry to step on your story. It's shocking.
It is. It is shocking to think that we should be a coordinated security apparatus. There's regulations. There's procedures for defense support for civil authorities. I've taught it for the military. They don't realize they brought me in to ask me to teach this for foreign governments coming to visit. There's a process for when law enforcement needs help and we dial 911. It's through the military. And that failed. That failed miserably because of the law Congress passed and the denial I was receiving.
Well, it sounds like it was prevented. So Paul Irving, the guy who had, you're saying, the statutory authority to give that okay, has he ever explained why he didn't?
Oh, they had him and he testified at the Senate hearing in 2001.
2021?
I'm sorry, 2021. My apologies. Thank you for catching. A couple of times he disagreed with my recollection. I can tell you my phone records, I turned them over immediately. I fought to testify. They didn't want me to testify in the Senate hearing. I fought to testify.
Why wouldn't they? Oh, there's so much here. Who didn't want you to testify?
So when
You're the chief of Capitol Police on January 6th. I mean,
you and me are on lockstep with this, and my story hasn't changed in 2.5 years. So when they first put out the notice and they were talking about having the hearing, it was only for current employees that were still in place. No one that was no longer in place in their position in security. So think about that. Initially, when they put out the request to have they were talking about having the hearing, it would have excluded Paul Irving, would have excluded Mike Stinger, and it would have excluded me. Only 3 people. The 3 people at the top of the security apparatus.
So the Democrats, I think.
Well, it was joint. It was a combined joint. I hear you.
I'm sorry. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Of course. The Uniparty intentionally excluded the 3 people who would know the answers to the key questions.
Yeah, the original plan was to exclude them. I immediately called somebody I knew on the Rules Committee and said, please let me testify. I will be there in person. And I still remember, she said, you'll show up in person? I said, I promise you, I will be there in person. I want to testify. And I was the only one that showed up in person.
It just seems like the denial of your request to have National Guardsmen who are within eyesight, you saw them, to have them help, that's a pivotal moment on that day. Mm-hmm. And we know the name of the man who made that decision, and we still don't know why he made that decision. And that's just shocking to me. Has he ever answered that question?
No, he's never answered that question specifically that I'm aware of. And I do know when they were talking about the J6 committee coming out, I think it was Representative Benny Thompson that had said Speaker Pelosi is off limits. So they wouldn't get any of her records or phone records.
What do you mean she's off limits?
I believe that was one of the things he said, that her coming into this was she was off limits to the inquiries of the January 6th.
Well, she was running the House that day.
I hear you. If we're truly trying to get to the bottom of this, trying to find out what happened.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, I mean, that's insane.
You would be getting everyone's records. I've been forthright. All my phone records have been turned over. And like I said, there's a description of all the numerous calls I made requesting approval. Think about it. In that 71 minutes, I called in 17 police agencies, 1,700 officers to help us get the Capitol back. And I also made those 11 calls trying to find out where.
You are as precise as an airline pilot in your recollection of things. So yes, I think everything you have said is provable. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are not.
The book's all based on fact. You can go through it. I reference all the facts I have, footnote. You get access to a lot of the intelligence. I mean, it's fact. And my story hasn't changed in 2.5 years.
So I'm just to circle back to this Paul Irving, who played a pivotal role, I think whose name is unknown to most people, even people who follow what happened on January 6th. What happened to him?
No idea. He disappeared shortly thereafter. Haven't heard much from him. Had a couple of conversations with Mike Stinger before he passed away, but nothing from Mr. Irving.
So he was House Sergeant at Arms, and then when did he leave after January 6th?
So it's interesting. So he officially left the 7th, but his signature is on a document making my assistant chief of intelligence the chief of police on the 8th. It's kind of weird the way it worked, but so I guess he was out the 7th or the 8th.
Was he close to Pelosi?
Oh yes. Was he? Oh yeah. He was a very loyal. It's interesting. He was able to go between Republican and Democrat pretty well. He knew how to
Not a
play
huge
the political
difference
game
on some level.
But he was extremely loyal
to Nancy Pelosi. And it's unclear what happened to him after he left.
No idea.
The Capitol.
Yeah.
Has he done, to your knowledge, we haven't found any, but interviews about
not that I'm aware of. No.
Was he called to testify before the January 6th committee? Do you know?
I believe he was. I believe there may be. I'm just drawing a blank right now. Written testimony of his. I know he was one of the two that showed up in 2021 for the Senate hearing. He was on video. So was Mike Stinger. And they were asking him about his recollection of when I called him, and he was like, I don't recall that. Now I had my first timing wrong when I went and asked for the initial National Guard. I originally thought it was January 4th, which was Monday. It was January 3rd when he denied me the first time.
Even though he apparently, or certainly federal agencies, had intel suggesting this was going to be a bigger than normal protest and could be violent.
Absolutely. Now, when you look back and you see some of the intel that was out there, and I reference a lot of it in the book, there's intel talking about going up and killing the palace guards. Those are my officers. There's intel talking about using chemicals at some of the entry points. There's intel indicating that they've done surveillance on some of the entry points at the Capitol. None of that's been included. They talk about burning down the Supreme Court. They talk about different attacks on different members of Congress. And they talk about storming the building. Not a single word of that is included in any of the intelligence assessments. And a matter of fact, my intelligence unit is putting out documents on the 4th, 5th, and 6th indicating a low probability of civil disobedience.
What?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you were, and I'm not, but if you were conspiracy minded, you might think that certain agencies concluded there was likely to be chaos at the Capitol, and that served their political purposes, and so they let it happen, and they prevented you from stopping it.
When you tie that into a number of other things that happen, and if you haven't been, I'd love to take you through some of the military stuff really quick.
And I hope you will at length. And can I just ask, I think most people don't understand that the U.S. military would have a role in a domestic political protest. Why would the U.S. military, which we pay to fight wars abroad, be involved in a protest in the United States?
So the way it would work is, like I said, through a program. A lot of times the military will come out, they'll do support for civil authorities, whether it's COVID response. They did it during the avian flu, but they'll also do it during civil disobedience. We've used them I've activated and sworn in hundreds, if not thousands, of National Guard troops for IMF World Bank, for inauguration. So we'll have them to help line the parade route. just to help us fortify the perimeter. Sometimes they'll have what their QRF, quick response force, in reserve in case we need additional civil disturbance support. So that's how they'll kind of support law enforcement. So 340 were activated for traffic control and management of crowds around like metro stations, so they weren't backed up and stuff like that. Not for specific civil disobedience. So we knew we had National Guard in there. And the Defense Support for Civil Authorities program is, if we become overwhelmed, our backstop for law enforcement, and I used up all my resources, and I was overwhelmed, would have been the military, specifically the National Guard. So 209, I get approval to bring in the National Guard. Probably 210, 211. My first call, well, I've already called General Walker. Called General Walker at 1:51. I was like, I can't wait any freaking longer. I call him, I said, send me the National Guard as quick as you can. I'm going to get approval any minute, because he asked, do you have approval from the Capitol Police Board? And I said, I'll have approval any minute. Please just get them coming this way. So they're within eyesight. Shortly after 209, I talk to them. 2:34, I get a notification to get on the call with the United States Pentagon. I have to sell my request for the National Guard. I'm on the call with a Lieutenant General Piat, trying to make sure I have his name pronounced right, and a General Flynn is on the call. And it's mainly Piat that I'm speaking with. I get on the call, Mayor Bowes is on the call, Chief Conti's on the call, and I said, I need the National Guard immediately. This is an urgent situation. I still remember saying urgent twice. This is urgent. And they got to be looking at the same TVs I'm looking at. I need the National Guard immediately. You know what his response is? Don't like the optics of the National Guard on Capitol Hill. He goes, I would rather have your officers in the fight and we can backfill your officers somewhere else. I said, I don't have that option. All my officers are in the fight. He goes, I'm telling you, I don't like the option of the National Guard. I don't like the optics of the National Guard on the Hill. I said, sir, we're having our asses handed to us. This is life or death. I need assistance immediately. And I still remember, he said, my recommendation is not to support the request. And I still remember Robert Conti going, whoa, hold on. You're denying the chief of the Capitol Police? And he comes back and says, not that we're denying him. I just don't like the optics of the National Guard on Capitol Hill. And he goes, and he goes back to that again, I'd rather backfill your people. I said, sir, I don't have that option.
This sounds like a setup to me. I'm sorry, it does.
It gets better. So I beg, and he goes, well, I'm going to walk down the hall and we'll talk to the Secretary of Defense or whoever he's going to talk to. Right then I get notification. Oh, so I'm still on the call. We have the shooting of Ashley Babbitt. And I said, we have shots fired. I still remember yelling over the phone. We have shots fired on the U.S. Capitol. Is that urgent enough for you now? Hang up the phone, because now I got to start making my notifications. I got to call the Sergeant Arms saying, hey, we got what looks like maybe a confirmed shooting. Do you know when the National Guard finally arrived? 6 p.m. 6 p.m. they're sworn in on post. Do you know those National Guard, the 150 to 180 that are within eyesight of the Capitol? You know what they do with them? They put them in vehicles, drive them around the Capitol back to the D.C. Armory. You know where the D.C. Armory is.
It's far away, yeah.
Washington,
Yes.
White House is on one side, United States Capitol, D.C. Armory almost equidistant on the other
RFK
side.
Stadium.
Yeah, over by RFK Stadium. They drive them back then, and they send me in the evening troops.
Not really.
Can you frickin' believe it? No, that's real. That's real. And you know what else they do? While I'm begging for assistance, the Pentagon's sending resources to generals' houses to protect their homes, but not me. So you begin to think, it seems a little conspiratorial. I can see where I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I can see where people begin to go down that rabbit hole real quick.
That rabbit hole? I mean, I don't know what the other conclusion is. Because, look, under pressure, people make mistakes and make bad decisions. But you're describing a systematic denial of intelligence and then of support, defense, through a whole bunch of different agencies, a whole bunch of different people, all reaching the same baffling conclusion that we're not going to protect the Capitol.
Right. Multiple agencies with people with extensive experience, and you're getting this type of response. And when you look at the level of intelligence, it's baffling that nobody put anything out ahead of time.
Maybe it's not baffling. I mean, remember, this was the end of the Trump administration. A month, almost 2 months into a contested election. This is a politically charged moment with ramifications that we're now living through. But there's a lot at stake here. This is not just your average protest, correct?
Correct. There is.
Did you feel that? Did you feel a political vibe coming off these decisions at the time, or were you just so in your law
Oh
enforcement?
no, I was looking at the cameras that were surrounding me with my officers, the men and women of the Capitol Police, and the